What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the High Floor Football Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Wagman, and with me, as always, is my faithful co-host, JR, who had some internet issues, but managed to show up in his every week Hawaiian shirt. Jay, how you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm doing well. You know, had some technical difficulties, but we made it. I'm glad to be here. Glad to have Herms here, who I'm sure you're going to introduce in a second. He's a good friend of ours, and we're happy to have him here. Talk some running backs.
Yeah. Speaking of that, Herms, Herms is the wizard, the magician. Just started over at DraftSharks. How you doing, my friend?
What is up, gentlemen? Oh my gosh, I'm doing well. I'm just glad to be able to talk about such a fun position group. Talk to some homies about some cool stuff, and hopefully teach the audience a thing or two that they didn't know before.
Yeah, absolutely. But, before we dive right into everything, I want to talk about Underdog Fantasy, and they are our gracious partners here at High Floor Football. And if you want to go start honing your fantasy football draft skills, Underdog is the absolute best place for you to go. Even if your friends haven't even thought about draft season yet, you can get a leg up by heading over to Underdog Fantasy. If you go ahead and use our code HFF when you sign up, you can get a free 100% deposit match up to $100 on your first deposit. And they even got tournaments out already. I mean, you can be like Pat Kerrane and win $2 million. Like, who would have thought that was possible a couple of years ago? Well, Underdog made that possible. And they currently just released the new SuperFlex Big Board. It's got rookies. It's got everything. And come draft the SuperFlex Big Board team with us sometime and use our code HFF when you sign up. But I want to get right into it since we got a packed show tonight talking about Herms' specialty over here, running backs. And before we really start into it, I want to break down this your latest article. It's in your pin tweet. If they go over to your Twitter over at Herms NFL, and I really wanted to talk about the biggest surprise on here, and that is where you ranked Bijan Robinson 1. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I know it's a bit of a controversial take, but if you go in and you really watch the film on this kid, I think you're gonna like what you see. He can run pretty well.
I know. Me seeing Bijan there was a huge shock, but no, I want to talk about a couple of these other running backs because it is truly a really good class. And, it started out looking like it wasn't a very strong class, but really just want to break it down from start to finish. So really, we can actually start by talking about Bijan, and I really want to hear what makes him stand out as by far and away the most electric running back in this class, and is the gap really that big as people think it is?
I mean, I think it is, and a lot of that comes down to the fact that I've said it repeatedly. Like, my favorite thing about him is just the fact that, like, he just has this insane level of stamina. Like, when I'm watching his games and stuff, I'm just like, this dude is running with the same amount of power, effort, and energy at the first quarter as he is as the final seconds are ticking down in the fourth. Like, it's rare that we find those guys like that. Like, there are a lot of running backs that can hold up and play for an entire game. Obviously, like, that's not the feature of this that's impressive. But it's just like, you could just show me any part of a random game and I wouldn't be able to guess how far into the game we're talking. Like, Derrick Henry is another type of guy that's like that, where it's just like, as the game wears on, he's only going to get stronger because he's not starting to fade physically as these defenses are. So it's like, when you have that type of guy, like, dude, all bets are off. And, like, I know that it was kind of a little bit weird to sprinkle into my profile on the website, but I put down that Bijan Robinson reminded me, at least as a runner, of Corey Dillon. If we remember back in the day, Bengals, Patriots, just like that dude, like, the accumulation of those yards, just like carry after carry after carry with that big frame and just barreling through people. Like, Bijan can do that. And he's pretty good at catching the ball too. So, look, it's really more of a matter of what he can't do rather than trying to figure out what he can do, because it's a lot of different stuff.
So building on that a little bit more, Jay, why don't you go ahead real quick?
Well, I was just going to say I've been trying to, figure out some mock drafts as well. We're about a month out from the draft, a little bit less. And, he's so interesting because we all know, how talented he is. Some people, I think Daniel Jeremiah has him as his third highest prospect overall of all the positions. And, we kind of know how running backs valued in the NFL now. And, they don't go as highly as maybe, he's not going to go third overall like Jeremiah might have him. But, the Saquon Barkleys, the Zeke Elliott's, those guys have gone really high in the first round of the draft. And even though, the market has changed a little bit on running backs, I'm having a tough time figuring out where Bijan is going to go in that first because, 8 to Atlanta maybe seems a little too early, but then you get into the 20s and you think maybe somebody's going to take him a little bit before. Just off the cuff, do you have any fit that you think would be a good spot for Bijan or, realistically in the draft or just maybe a fit that you think he'd work out best in?
I mean, just in terms of like team fit or scheme fit, the cool thing about him is that answer is literally anywhere. Mm-hmm. But in a matter of, just where he would fit just for the present construction of a team. I mean, we've kind of heard whispers about like maybe Joe Mixon could be on his way out of Cincinnati. Maybe Dalvin Cook could be on his way out of Minnesota. Like either of those teams, because justifying spending a first round pick on a running back is a pretty tough thing to sell. But if you're one of those teams down there picking in that range, that's like, look, we already have pretty much everything else that we need on the offensive side of the ball. What if we just installed a really talented young running back like that? Like you can sell that. You can easily sell that. So, I mean, like I hate to say it, especially as somebody who roots for a rival team. And I hate the Bengals the most of any team in the NFL, but it would make so much sense. It would. That's probably the one where, like, again, I'd hate it, but for fantasy purposes and even for real life purposes, I'm like, damn, but it would be so cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. It pretty much fits everywhere, and it's almost the it's tough for fantasy because you really think wherever he does go, pretty much any running back there is going to struggle to get some touches when Bijan's in the backfield. So, hopefully he does go to a place like that where they do cut a Joe Mixon or cut a Dalvin Cook and add a Bijan Robinson into that offense. And go ahead.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on what you said earlier. You said it's easier to talk about the things that he doesn't do well. It really, is there anything that Bijan does not do well that could hamper him in an NFL scheme?
I don't think so. I mean, my biggest criticism of him was the fact that like some of the decision making wasn't always there because I felt like he has the physicality to be able to just not always make the smartest choice and just run through the defender anyway because he is that big and he is that fast for somebody who's as big as he is. So like with his frame and just natural athletic talent, like he can get away with it. Like it's fine. Like a smaller dude that's not nearly as good at playing the sport, probably not, but I'm not going to penalize a guy as talented as Bijan for that. So like, I guess that's a negative, but if you can get away with it, does it really count? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that stood out to me most of anything was the fact that, while so many of these running backs are, just okay receiving options, Bijan can actually run routes. I mean, they split him out wide a bunch at Texas. He could literally be, a third or fourth wide receiver for a team and line up in the slot and really mess up a defense there. Because if you put like a linebacker or a safety on him, they'll get lost at like just immediately trying to track Bijan. So something like that, he's just far and away the RB1 in this class. But, we spent a good amount of time talking about him. I want to move on to pretty much everyone's consensus number 2 at this point, and that's Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama, who really at this point profiles as more of a pass-catching running back. But, does he get the James Cook kind of treatment to where, teams kind of label him like a sub back, or can he see a potential 3-down role in an offense if he goes to the right system?
I'm not entirely sure if he'll ever see a true 3-down thing, but like as an interior runner, like he was pretty fine. I mean, obviously people worry about the whole like 199 pounds, it's 1 pound lighter than the 200 threshold. So like we see that and it's like, sound the alarms, but like I think he could do a little bit more than what he's given credit for. I mean, like if they're gonna play to his strengths, then like as the pass catching back out of the backfield, like that dude at least of everybody that I've watched, like he's the best at it, man. Like especially the diversity of his routes that he ran, not only running from out of the backfield, but also, he lined up wide at times too and looked very good doing that. And when we talk about these guys that are good pass catching running backs, we think about just like, oh, it's going to be a simple screen, a simple dump off, or they're just going to run into the flat and do something. And those are about the three things you're going to get out of it. But like the diversity of the routes that Gibbs can actually successfully execute, like those angle routes, doing that stuff like that. Like that dude, absolutely incredible. Like he's one of my favorites for that reason. But I don't know, like he's not going to get a ton of carries between the tackles, but I mean, if you just set him up, with some zone blocking, enable him to be able to, make that first cut and get into the second level, like he's got enough juice and he's big enough to play through certain contact. I mean, he's never going to be mistaken for a bulldozer, but I don't know. He could do a little bit more. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of role he gets. And I do think it's going to be very landing spot dependent. I do think he's one of those guys. And unfortunately, we kind of saw James Cook land in a spot where he did get a bit minimalized. And so, I do wonder if that is a place for him. And, staying on that subject, is there, the perfect landing spot for a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs?
It's so hard. It's so hard to project these places for guys that are good at what he's good at. It's that just comes down to an offense being willing to carve out a role to throw the ball a bunch to a running back. Like I don't know. We're just gonna have to be at the mercy of wherever he ends up, pretty much.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Jay, you got anything to add before we move on to the next guy?
Yeah. I mean, he's a really interesting back. I think that, he's pretty much the consensus too. The only one that I could really see maybe squeak into the back end of the first to one of those, contending teams that could add a talent like him. I think we all kind of need to just come to terms with, there's not really too many workhorse backs in the NFL anymore that are just, handling the whole backfield, that are getting all this work. And so you do want to find profiles like a Gibbs who, at least if he's in a backfield sharing touches with one or two other guys, he's getting the more high value touches, hopefully. He had 44 catches last year, 36 the year before in college, which is, pretty good, over 400 yards the past 2 years receiving. And, like Herm says, if you watch Jahmyr Gibbs at all, I mean, he's not just catching screen passes. He's not just there as an outlet. I mean, he runs good routes. He's great after the catch. And I mean, yeah, the size thing is always so funny to me, man. I mean, that I get it. And I totally understand, the data that goes into it and people's models. And like, it's just the model where, it scores them a little bit differently if, you're under 200. My weight's fluctuating, a couple pounds every day, I feel like. And he gets, downgraded for being 199 instead of maybe 201, 202. I'm like, man, I mean, I feel like you could put on a couple of pounds like that. We're not talking about, when Devontae Smith came out, if it's like gaining, can you put on 10, 15 pounds? We're talking about, can you gain, 3 or 4 pounds to get over this threshold of 200, which I think on maybe a good day, he might weigh over 200. Maybe on, combine day, he didn't. But yeah, I think he's a really exciting back, and especially for fantasy. I think we're, with a lot of these other backs we'll also talk about, we're kind of having to project their profile in terms of being pass catchers and how much will they at the next level. I think with Gibbs, I mean, if he's going to do anything, he's going to be a pass catching back in some sort of backfield. The comp that I've seen for him that I actually really like, because the older one, the more kind of lazy one, I feel like with his aesthetic and the way that he looks as well, was Alvin Kamara. But Alvin Kamara is a little bit thicker, a little bit different of a runner. Aaron Jones is one that I've seen people comp Jahmyr Gibbs to, which I think is pretty interesting.
Like that.
And yeah, and Aaron Jones is like that too. I mean, he's always shared touches with, it was Jamal Williams, now it was AJ Dillon to an extent, but he's been plenty productive. He catches passes. He's a good runner as well. Little undersized, you would think, but I think Gibbs can probably put on a little bit more weight in the NFL as well. I really liked that comp. I wish I could give credit to whoever had it. I just can't remember it off the top of my head, but I thought that was a fun comp for him.
It is definitely a good one. And, I hope that he can carve out a kind of role. I mean, if your ceiling is Aaron Jones, I think that's a relatively very, very good ceiling. I think that's probably the high end of his projected output, in terms of, what kind of back he'd be in the NFL. I'm not sure if he'll ever be able to get that kind of carry load from a team. But again, it all depends on the kind of fantasy system that he lands in there. I want to move on to a guy that I don't think Jay is very high on as well, based on what he told me earlier this week. And I know I'm not very high on, and I've reached out to many people
here, Herms.
Yeah. So I want to talk about Zach Charbonnet a little bit. And he's the guy who's pretty much settled in as a lot of analysts RB3. He's yours as well as all your colleagues over at DraftSharks, all their RB3. So tell us a little bit about Charbonnet, because I did get a crash course from our friend of the show, Derek Brown, the other morning when I basically texted him in a panic and please say sell me on this player because I don't see it. So I want to hear another side. Sell us on this guy, because Jay and I are both on the same page for once, in that if he's going off the board around the 107, 109 range in rookie drafts, we both have guys, and it's not just one, it's like two or three guys that we would rather have over Charbonnet at that range.
Yeah, man, you look at what he was able to do, or I guess wasn't really able to do early in his career at Michigan, and you're like, red flag, maybe, blah, blah, blah. But you have to consider, like, there were just, like, a lot of other pretty good running backs there. It was an irritating cycle early in his career, struggling to find playing time. Who knows how much of that was necessarily his fault? I don't follow college closely enough to have the full answer to that. But, we see some of those. Part of the reason that, he kind of justified leaving and transferring in the first place, at least as I can recall, Blake Corum, shout out, former Maryland high school player of the year. Always got to plug Maryland when I can. But, it's just like things got busy in Ann Arbor. Okay. So the man had to go somewhere else, went back closer to home. And, I get people kind of skeptical. It's like, the Pac-12, the level of competition, blah, blah, like, fine, whatever. But it's still major conference, so not nothing. At least it's not, some random dude we're talking about playing in the Sun Belt. And then also, Charbonnet does not possess any single, elite trait. I get that. If you're looking for something to leap off the screen and smack you in the face, then you're not going to find it. But what he does do is check the core boxes of the things that you want a running back to be able to do. Is he big? Yes. Can he functionally move with his size well in between the tackles, out on the perimeter with, just enough, acceleration, long speed? Yeah. Can he do those core, screen, dump off, in the flat, receiving stuff? Sure. Is he going to do anything more than that as a pass catcher? Absolutely not. But can he do those three things? Yeah, that's more than certain guys around that size can do. So you got to give him the dub on that. And then also, pretty good pass protector as well. So, you put all of that into a ball, and it's like, oh, look, an early down back for an NFL team that can immediately walk in and do something. That path to immediate relevance is there for him that some of these other guys might have to battle for. So, even though Charbonnet, you look at it, like I said, nothing elite, nothing is going to wow you. It's a little bit boring, but I am a huge fan of the guys that just do the core things right. And I don't know, because I think even in my profile, I compared him to just a 6-pack of cheap beer. If your goal at the end of if your goal is to hang out with the boys and get drunk or whatever, you could go buy something fancy, do whatever. But if you're just trying to get messed up on a budget and vibe out, just go buy a 6-pack of Tall Boys of PBR. Is it the best thing in the world? No, but it gets the job done and you compound them easily. That's what Zach Charbonnet is.
So I'm going to throw a comp.
I'm looking for.
Yeah, I'm going to throw a comp out here. David Montgomery. A little bit lesser version of David Montgomery, maybe. I think
Charbonnet is a better physical runner than Montgomery is. I put in my profile, I compared him to James Conner.
Okay, thought Connor was a little bit heavier coming out, right? He was around 225, right? 230.
Yeah, something around there. Yeah, but just in terms of but they're both still big dudes. They
Mm-hmm.
can both thump in between the tackles and stuff. And then the other part of it that really sold it for me was I saw Charbonnet, especially in goal line situations. I was like, all right, this guy he's got a nose for that end zone. Even if you don't love the rest of everything that he could do, let's say for all intents and purposes, all we get out of him is what we got out of Brian Robinson last year. Like, you didn't look back on that and regret what happened. You're like, well, it's kind of boring, but hey, look, he found the end zone, didn't he? You know, like that's a good thing. That's 6 points in most leagues. Okay,
like a like a little bit more athletic version of Jamal Williams, basically there.
So, I like these guys.
I like that, and I think that works really well. Sorry, Jay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can't argue with that. He has scored a bunch of touchdowns in his college career. He scored 11, 13 another year, 14 his last year. I mean, he had a huge production last year. I mean, he only played 10 games at over 1,300 yards, 14 touchdowns, 37 catches. I mean, that's good. My whole thing with him has been more in rookie drafts, just where he's going. Some people are taking him in like the 107, 108, like Sam said. I prefer some of those wider Herms. I know you do too, with Jordan Addison as well. I know you're a fan of his. And yeah, I mean, it's those type of guys that I'm taking those wide receivers a little bit over him, because he just doesn't wow me necessarily with his profile. I do feel like it's a Bijan and then Gibbs, and then I'm taking a lot of those wide receivers before I'm comfortable really taking any of the running backs, and that includes Charbonnet. And he just doesn't stand out to me. And I don't know. I just kind of feel like, in that mid round, that second round of rookie drafts, I mean, it's packed with running backs. Like all these guys we're going to talk about are pretty much going in that second round. Some are leaking into that third. And I just don't know that he's separated that much for me than some of those other guys. I mean, he has awesome college production, like you said, can't argue with that. He just doesn't really pop for me. And I kind of just feel like in the NFL, like I was just saying with Jahmyr Gibbs, if he doesn't get, full backfield essentially, or at least, a large percentage of it, I think he will get those high value touches where, like you said, Brian Robinson, there's nothing wrong with Brian Robinson, especially if you got him at like a good value. And if, you're able to use him as that RB2, but I just prefer some of the wide receivers over him in that range. And I'm interested to hear when we talk about some of these other running backs you have as well, because I kind of feel like he's in that group. I don't feel like he's necessarily in Gibbs tier, and I don't think he's in a tier of his own. I kind of think he's grouped in with the rest of these guys. So not necessarily a hater on him, but I just prefer some other guys ahead of him in the range that he's going in rookie drafts right now.
Yeah, and I definitely agree there. I mean, I've always been, a draft for talent kind of guy personally, and for rookie drafts, and I do think, when you aspire to that, type of style of drafting, I think you tend to lean towards more some of those those wide receivers than you would to a guy like Charbonnet, who again, like we've said multiple times during this breakdown, does all these things at a very mild, mediocre level and doesn't do anything really that special. So for me, I think it's just drafting for upside at that point. I think Charbonnet is just going to be like a guy who, if he gets you 11 touches at the goal line or 11 touchdowns at the goal line and he gets you 900 rushing yards, great. But, is he going to get you 1,300 rushing yards and 15 touchdowns? Probably not, unless he has a special year. And then maybe even then it might just be a one-off.
Yeah. Well, let me just, one more thing on him is, like we're all going to say, like everybody, pretty much says pre-draft, as we're almost a month before the draft is, the landing spot will change some things for him. And I'm totally with you, Sam. I do prefer to, draft for talent, most of the time. But for these running backs, sometimes the situation does matter early on in their career.
Oh, yeah.
You could find, look at Tyler Algier. I'm not a huge Tyler Algier fan, but I mean, last year he fell into a good situation, and you got to use him for that year, and, you benefited from it. I don't know how it's going to be in the future for him. We'll see what Atlanta does in the draft. But yeah, if Charbonnet goes like, early to mid-second, I don't think he's going to go early second, but if he goes in the mid-second round or like early third in a good situation, that could change a little bit how I feel about him for 2023. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know I'm not as much concerned with running backs and their draft capital that much. And I do think it's all about his landing spot. I think that's going to be a huge thing, like you said. I want to move on to another guy who's absolutely going to be landing spot dependent. I mean, he could be one of the best running backs in this draft. He could probably be a gadget player in a couple of years, a la like a Tavon Austin type of player, if he doesn't pan out in the right way. And that's your fourth ranked running back. It's Devin Achane, who, the speedster of this draft, a guy who feasibly could have been maybe even, a slot wide receiver at some point in his college career if he had made the change. But again, Achane is a guy who I'm not quite sold on as a guy who will be able to carve out a meaningful role in the NFL. So, Herms, why don't you break down A-Chain for us?
He is very fast. He is so
cutting edge,
but he's like so fast.
He's like an Olympic sprinter, isn't he?
I mean, honestly, like, because part
so
of my
is Devin Allen.
True, but but like honestly, it's insane to me. Like one of the pieces of film that I turned into GIF form and put in the article that like really impressed me the most. I can't remember who it was against, but there was just like one run of his where he just like turns the perimeter and just like accelerates and just explodes to the point where like to the untrained eye you could be like, hold on, did they zoom like no, did they speed that up, did they put that in fast forward? Like no, he just gets up to that astronomical speed just like so quickly that I'm like, damn, bro, like that's video game type speed to it. Like I'm just impressed with that. Like, I mean, there are a lot of guys that are fast, but like, I can't even remember what that movie's from, but it's like, he's so fast, he makes guys that are fast look not fast. Like I'm here for that, dude. Like, I'm here for that rare type of talent. And like you were saying before, like the other cool thing about him is that like, even going back to his high school, like recruiting profile, like there were thoughts that it's like, he could change positions and just be a really good slot receiver. And there were moments on film where I saw like he was able to just, like I said, use that acceleration, get up to speed, create separation between himself and defenders. And like, I thought he had pretty good hands, pretty soft hands bringing the ball in. Like, I rank him this high because I assume that whatever team takes him pretty high, because like what he did at the combine, he's definitely going to just be drafted high because everybody's going to be excited about it. Like, I just assume they have a plan. And in today's, modern game, like you can just scheme him up in one of those roles that, those zone blocking things, push him out toward the perimeter constantly. You don't have to overly expose him to interior rushing stuff all the time. Like, think about it like this. Put this man in Miami. What kind of fun would that be? That would be a ton of fun. Don't you think? That would be pretty great. But, I don't know. I understand I am aggressively ranking this man. There is a risk in which he could just be Naheem Hines because a team just puts him in such a specific box that he's like really cool to have on your actual NFL team, but a little too irritating for your fantasy team outside of best ball because it's like, well, when am I ever going to plug him in the lineup? Like, that can happen. I am prepared for the possibility that can happen. But when a guy's just like create a player in Madden type good with like that one trait, like, and it's not just the speed. Like I said, it's not just the speed. It's the burst, it's the acceleration. Like, it all goes into it. It's not like there's another guy we're going to talk about later that's also like super fast, but it's just straight line speed, and that's really about all I see. Like, there's more nuance to Devin A-Chain to the point. I'm just going on so much about this. I'm just very excited about him. That's all.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Miami too, because Miami is like that perfect landing spot for a lot of these running backs. But then they went and just re-signed literally everybody who's ever played in that backfield in the past couple of years. Like, and it wasn't just Mostert and Jeff Wilson. They gave Gaskin like an extension. They gave Ahmed back. Like, they brought back like their whole backfield. And I was thinking like, okay, this is maybe a signal they're not going to take one because they literally re-signed their backups on backups. But I agree, it would be a great spot. And interestingly, I mean, he had 196 carries last year. He almost had 200 carries. So, I mean, in college, he wasn't used like, this scat, like a Nyheim Hines, like you said, but Nyheim Hines also was used a little bit differently than, he has been in the pros. So I think you're really right to say that, I mean, the risk is there and the risk is kind of baked into it. Like, you're taking the risk, but it's fun and it's a fun risk to take. So I agree with you on that. And I think it is going to be, really landing spot dependent for him and what kind of backfield he can find himself in. Because I would imagine some NFL teams, it's kind of the situation of an NFL team might look at him like he'll be a better NFL player than he will be maybe a fantasy player. You know what I mean? Like, might not give us like the production that we want for fantasy points, but an NFL team might be like, no, we're perfectly fine with him. He does what we ask him to do. And so that'll be interesting to see because I don't know how much like returning he did in college, if any. I just speaking freely on
he is very, very good at that too.
Yeah, because I was gonna say I'm looking at some clips on Herms's DraftSharks article.
Yeah, I was gonna say
They're on
like
here.
Nyheim Hines. I mean, Nyheim Hines is used all over the place, doing all sorts of stuff, but you can never really find the perfect spot for him in fantasy unless, a couple guys go down. You figure he's going to have a big game one day, something like that. But an NFL team looks at Nyheim Hines and they're like, yeah, he does a bunch for us. Like, we like Nyheim Hines. The Bills traded a pick for Nyheim Hines, and I didn't even use him last year, it felt like. So, I totally see that. I mean, he rushed for 1,100 yards, too, so it's just like his profile is weird to where it's like, I get it because he's not even like 190. He's like, 182 or whatever he is. And so like there's that sort of his body is more of like the scat body, but like, yeah, I mean, he handled a lot more work than I think he kind of gets credit for in the way that he's talked about.
Yeah. Because, like, he's more agile than he gets credit for. Like, I mean, obviously, he's not going to be physically imposing between the tackles, but, like, there were a couple points that I even, highlighted in my profile. I'm like, just watch him do it. Like, yeah, it's not the strongest part of his game, but, like, he's aware enough and able to stop and cut fast enough to the point where, like, obviously, you're not going to trust this dude with 1 billion carries a game, but, like, he's good enough to do it more than I think our instincts would suggest. Because I mean, even for as like small as he is, like he's a built little guy. Like it's not he's not just some little beanpole out there. And I think that's kind of the other thing that people should keep an eye on.
Yeah, I agree as well. And something that I'm taking into account that you put in your article here is that he's a taller, faster Darren Sproles. And obviously that speaks to us. We watched Darren Sproles for years, and we're uniquely familiar with that kind of talent profile. So and we don't take people tossing around Sproles' name because people have a habit when they see an undersized and underweight guy to kind of throw that Darren Sproles comp around. But I do think A-Chain is kind of that mold in which he is a taller version. But I watched some of the clips and the gifts that are in this article and some of the things I've seen when watching college football and watching Texas A&M football over the past few years. A-Chain really is a unique change to direction type of player, and I don't think he's quite there to Tyreek Hill. Kind of how you comped him in your article, and I understand why you got to that point.
I did it because I wanted to shoehorn the Pokemon reference.
I know, I see that. I love it. I love the So for reference, people listening to this, if you're into Pokemon, A-Chain is the Charmeleon to Isaiah Pacheco's Charmander and Tyreek Hill's Charizard. Basically, this is saying he's right in the middle of the two of them, and it's kind of like an amalgamation of the two. And I like that. He doesn't have Hill's, unique speed and change of pace ability, but he's almost there. And he doesn't have Pacheco's weight, but he's there in the fact that he is kind of a driven runner. And I'm looking at this clip against LSU where he kind of drives into a defender and kind of takes him down the field. He takes multiple defenders a little bit down the field in this and then breaks away. So I do think that he can be there. And I do like Darren Sproles' comp in that I think he's going to be a very good lateral player and side to side. So I'm very, very interested in seeing that. All right. Anything to add here before we move on to the next guy, Jay?
I was going to say we keep Darren Sproles very close to our hearts. Everyone's just throwing around these Darren Sproles comps like he grows on trees. He might be small enough to grow on a tree, but he does not.
Yes, we've got a few of those kind of guys in the Philadelphia Eagles running back room over the years, from Boston Scott to Sproles.
Your boy who you brought up the other week, Donnell Pumphrey. There it is.
Yeah, Donnell Pumphrey as well. I mean, Howie Roseman likes those guys. But I want to now talk about the darling of the fantasy, football and analytics community over the past few months. He balled out at the Senior Bowl. I like him. But again, as we get further down this list, I'm going to be more and more because these guys profile as, guys who can fit in a spot, but don't really fit in everywhere. It's like kind of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. But Tyjae Spears is a kind of guy that really showed that he can compete with a bunch of NFL players. He's a little bit undersized as well. He comes in right around 201 pounds, but he's got, good height, and he's cresting 22 years old. I want to hear about Tyjae Spears because I do want to know if his history that we'll get into is going to hold him back a little bit.
I mean, even before getting into that, I think what people need to pay attention to about Spears is that, like, on a bird's eye level, you can look at the guy and be like, "Oh, it's small school Alvin Kamara." Like if you're gonna be, pretty reductive about it, like, sure, yeah, I guess. But like dude, he's a really bendy player, like in terms of just his physical pliability and flexibility. Like the dude, like like those types of dudes, like you can slip defenders a lot more easily. You can do some fun stuff like that. You can avoid a lot of contact that way. Like that's fun, and it's pretty evident on film, like why he's super effective doing that. Coupled with the fact that like a couple of the other guys we already talked about, like he gets up to speed pretty well. There is a very good amount of acceleration to Spears' game. But like, I don't know. The next part of it is the injury background, so I'll let you set that up the way you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think we have to talk about. I hate talking about injuries, especially with running backs, because as we all know, injury prone is like not a thing, but it's a little bit it's a little bit concerning. So we have a season-ending injury, season-ending ACL and meniscus injury. In his redshirt freshman year, struggle with rehab, a contemplation of quitting football. Bring us through that and whether he can kind of crest over that to become an NFL talent there.
He can. I mean, like you said, we never want to just like assume, because when you assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. But like I just like reading the details about that I found just in doing some like background research on it. Like, I mean, I felt for the dude on the human level. Like, I can definitely tell that like it's cool that like he was really able to overcome that mentally and emotionally and then physically to be able to come back. So at least as far as that goes, like I'm rooting for him to not be hurt again. But like he has very wiry legs. Like he is not a particularly large man, which is like like it's okay in terms of like some of the other players that we talk about, just because like your weight distribution, your muscle distribution, like there are ways that you can kind of overcome that. But like he's got really skinny legs, and based off of what I was just talking about how he like relies a lot on his physical pliability and flexibility to do this stuff, I'm like, bro, like like that knee's already been pretty badly damaged, and with his play style, and just like it makes me nervous to the point where maybe not so much nervous that like he'll ever get hurt again, but nervous to the point that because of that, is a team going to be like, all right, 3 down, let's go, you're gonna be the guy? Like, probably not. I think it is going to pigeonhole him, like not in a bad way. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being the pass catcher guy, the change of pace, kind of lightning to somebody else's thunder type vibe, but I'm not as high on him as compared to my coworkers for that reason. It's not that he's bad, it's just that like what he does comes with some risk because of how he's built.
Yeah. Jay, before you dive in, I want to say one more thing that I noticed from the article, and it's something that I think is important to note. Something I've noticed a little bit, and it's definitely not backed up by stats or anything. It's more an assumption at this point, is that some of these smaller school running backs, the type of competition, and I know that's a huge thing with Spears, is the competition level. But just in a generality as a whole, do these smaller school running backs, given the fact that they don't play as high of a level of competition, maybe they don't face defensive ends that are a little bit bigger than at these smaller school levels than you would see at the SEC and in the Big 12, that kind of thing. When they get to the NFL, do they experience kind of a reality check in that they're running into bigger, faster dudes, and that could accelerate some of that injury history? Is that something we should absolutely worry about with Spears?
I mean, I don't know so much about it from the injury perspective, but I will say, just in terms of why I'm nervous about that competition level, is because of the archetype of player that he is. Like those home run hitter type dudes, where like the consistency of being able to see the hole, do the thing, like Spears didn't really consistently show that on film all the time. I mean, like, yeah, he did break off a bunch of really big plays that were super cool to watch sometimes. But like, if you're a home run hitter type guy that struggles with consistency in what is it, the American Athletic Conference, you know what I mean? Like, maybe I wouldn't be as worried about that at for a guy like, because I mean, like Travis Etienne was kind of that way coming out of Clemson. It's just like a couple plays, man, but then look at that big one, like. I'm not that worried about that coming from a guy from like a bigger conference, but like the small school guys, like if you're a different type of archetype, like if you are just like, yeah, it's a lower level of competition, but you're the big guy that just burns through people, you're like, just because you're so big, like your frame's going to translate to a higher competition level because you're big. You're the guy that's already used to just putting yourself through the tackles and doing all of that. Like I'm more so concerned about it for the type of player he is at that level of competition than I am just anyone being at that level of competition. You know what I mean? Like if he was bigger and more of an interior runner, I don't think I'd care. But it's a smaller dude, kind of needs
lateral.
the chunk. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jay, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, he had just crazy production, over 1,500 yards, 19 touchdowns. I mean, he did play, some good schools at the end of the season, but I want to, say their defenses weren't so great. I mean, he played UCF, he had a great game, and then he played Cincinnati, he had 35 carries for 181 and 2 touchdowns. And then what he did to USC in the bowl game where he had, 17 carries, 205 and 4 touchdowns. I'm out here on the West Coast. I watch USC all the time, and USC's defense was Swiss cheese.
Terrible.
So really bad. So I
say that having bet on them many times.
When we were talking a little bit about like the competition, and I was like, didn't he tear up USC? And then I was thinking in my head, I was like, but I've watched USC's defense plenty to know that they're pretty easy to tear up. He's really interesting for me because I know the injury history. I've heard about it plenty. He seems like kind of the darling of the offseason of everybody's kind of gotten higher and higher and higher on him as we get closer to the draft. And I mean, in rookie drafts, I think he's kind of climbed up a little bit higher than I'm comfortable with, again, kind of in this tier with these other running backs that I just feel like maybe don't seem to be like as fragile, I guess, in a sense. But he's got, plenty of upside. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with being the pass catcher in a backfield. And, the injury thing, as much as it is a detractor of him in a sense, with running backs, man, I mean, they're all going to get hurt at some point. Like, it's going to happen. His happened earlier, and it does hurt him moving forward. And the second that he does get hurt, you believe that's going to be the first thing everybody says is, well, we should have known this. He tore his ACL twice, all that stuff. But a lot of these guys, will have it at some point. I mean, Breece Hall had a perfectly, good college career, came into the NFL, tore his ACL. Like, Javonte Williams may have torn it, much worse than we could have expected. And now things are all, kind of up in the air for him. It happens to a lot of these guys, unfortunately. So while he's healthy, I think we got to kind of just view him like that and see what's going to happen. I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical too sometimes of guys that just put up like massive numbers at like smaller schools, but Tulane's not too small. I mean, they're good enough to play in the American Athletic Conference Championship, whatever they're calling it these days. And then they made a bowl game and played USC. So I mean, they're not any like Joe Schmo school. They're decent. But he did kind of really enhance his production. I mean, from 2019, 2020, he wasn't, too involved. It didn't even have like 30 carries and then bumped up to like 130, 230 last year. So, I mean, that is a lot of wear and tear on his tires for having the injury history that he has. But I'm interested to see where he goes. He's definitely in that tier of like the, second round of rookie drafts for me, kind of in that group with, the rest of these guys that we'll talk about.
Yeah, he's a guy for me that, again, Herms, I'm like going right down your articles here. I'm not going to reach for him. Like there were people that reached for him, in first rounds of rookie mocks and early seconds. I think I'm just going to let him come to me in a lot of those mid to late second rounds. And I'll be perfectly fine if he does. I'm getting a guy who will probably have, some sort of a defined role. But I don't know if I can hope for much more right away. Before we kind of get into the free-for-all part of this this discussion, you have a guy who's in your top 5 that is not in your coworker's top 5. And he's kind of a guy who, until the last 6 months, he was viewed, and really the last few years, was viewed as one of the better running backs in this class. And then, injuries happened, and the mental state happened, and the transfer happened. But, talk to us about Zach Evans. And because it really has been a roller coaster of a couple of years for this guy, and from TCU to Ole Miss. I want to hear your take and why he landed for you in some cases significantly higher than your colleagues.
He's that boy. I feel like he's that boy. No, I mean, honestly, like when it comes to looking back at his college history, like a lot of the, what's the phrase? Like what could go wrong did go wrong, or
Okay.
like whatever the version of that phrase that I'm butchering. Like a lot of the stuff that like could like getting injured, then falling out of favor at like the program that you went to, and then pivoting somewhere else, again getting injured, and then like Quinshon Judkins, like we'll come back to this conversation in a couple of years because Quinshon Judkins, I didn't know who he was, but I made it a point to watch a lot of Ole Miss football because I was just like intrigued by Zach Evans going there, that like I wanted to see it. And like, dude, Quinshon Judkins, if people aren't familiar, he was a freshman running back for the Ole Miss Rebels this past year. He was like a 3-star recruit, whatever. Like early part of the season, Zach Evans is doing super well, but then he picks up a few injury knocks, so they have to lean on the young kid. And it was just like, oh my gosh, this kid's incredible. Let's just keep giving him the ball more. And it kind of, saw Evans, fall down the depth chart. And people were like, oh, well, if he's getting outplayed by this freshman, then how good? Yeah, bro, like, especially like if you play Devi or anything like that, like, oh, dude, Quinshon Judkins, he's one of my dudes. All right. Like that guy, I don't think like him coming out of nowhere, sort of whatever, at least from my perspective. Like, I'm not somebody who's like in the weeds watching a ton of college football. Maybe people already knew who he was, but either way, how good he was, I don't think should take away from what Zach Evans did. Like, it's not like Zach Evans wanted to get hurt and cede some of his role to the freshman. I don't think that was in his plans, but at least when I watch him on film, like he's a bit of a smaller dude than I think people were like hoping for. I think 202 pounds he weighed in at the combine, Evans did. But like, I don't know, he's a really good north-south runner. Like he doesn't measure out super good in like the PFF like elusive rating and stuff like that, which my understanding, really comes to, like those like one-on-one like broken tackles, doing stuff like that. Like I think Zach Evans is just really good at reading the hole in front of him and just going for it. And when he gets confronted with a defender, he's really good at just positioning his body in the right way to just make the run right the first time. And like, I'm going to go here. I see this. And when I get there, I'm going to do this. I'm going to fight for a couple extra yards here. And then boom, plays over. It's just like, he's very, very efficient with the things that he does. And I also thought another guy, turn a corner, not the fastest dude in the world, doesn't have a ton of long speed, but he gets up to his max speed relatively quickly. So even though he's not a burner, he at least gets up to that speed quickly. And I don't know, I think he's a very smart player, which is what I'm really betting on.
I mean, for me, look, I remember 2-3 years ago, I want to say it was 2019, 2020. I mean, this guy was comped as one of the best freshman running backs who was ever coming out of high school, ever coming out of Texas. They had him right behind Bijan. I mean, like he was the it guy in this class, and it kind of just fell all apart. And like you said, you drew comparisons to Melvin Gordon and best running back prospect from Texas since Adrian Peterson, and so all this and that. And he decides to sign with TCU, and then everything happened at TCU, and he basically called out the program and said they weren't using him the right way. And they had no idea what they were doing, with his usage. Is this guy a character risk? Do we have to worry about something like that?
From what I could gather, the only thing that I really picked up was, some character stuff like when he was in high school. Because like his recruiting process, like I didn't go into detail about it in my profile because I just linked off to the article.
I see the link. I'm going to I'm going to go to that link after the show.
And I think like
myself.
Yeah, because like I think I even said that. I was just like, look, if you want to check this out, go for it, because it's a wild ride, bro. Because like he initially committed to like going to Georgia, which was like going to be super cool, but then like toward like the end of like his high school season or whatever, he was just kind of like acting a fool, doing whatever, goofing off, whatever, blah blah blah. Like that's the only level of this dude, being a doofus that I could find. If he was a doofus during his time in college, it's just stuff that I didn't find and pull up any articles to read about. So like, I don't know, like I would just hope that like maybe he's just like matured a little bit. Like some of these stories that we're talking about, it's just like this was like a senior in high school, man. Like, I was kind of a dick in high school. Like teenagers, man, what are you gonna do? Especially if like, you're a super talented athlete, everybody's calling you the next big thing. I mean, not to excuse people's egos, but at the same time, if you pump up a teenager with that much confidence, what do you think's gonna happen? Like that's just I'm just saying.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of that wide receiver diva energy, which I kind of like in my wide receivers sometimes. It feels like he's got a little bit of that to him, calling out the program, being like, I'm not getting the touches I want. I'm not happy here. I also like Herms' that dude metric, because that's kind of the way that I feel about Zach Evans too, early mid second round of these rookie drafts. For some reason, like I've said a couple times on the show now, I think there's this big group, and I mean, we're even like, we're 50 minutes in, we're not even going to, scratch the surface of all the running backs in this class, because it's a really deep class of guys. But he's a guy that I also kind of lean to when I'm deciding between this group. I'm like, Sam, like you said earlier, kind of talent outweighs the situation sometimes. And like, he seems like a guy that's just really talented. I mean, I'm looking at his game logs here from this last year too, because, he did split touches a little bit. He only had 4 games where he had over 11 carries. In those 4 games where he had, a decent amount, he had, 20 carries for 130, 18 for 134, 21 for 136, 17 for 207. All the rest of the games, he had 8 carries, 5 carries, 11 carries, 9 carries, where he really didn't get that much time to, kind of build up, it seems. In the games where he was really used significantly, where, getting like 17 plus carries, he, had over 130 yards and over 200 in one of them. So, I mean, I think that might be true. It just situationally in college, maybe he just didn't find the right spot. And I think that, if he is talented and if pro teams are going to do their homework on him and figure that out too, hopefully he will land somewhere where he gets that opportunity. And, this is such a deep class, and there are going to be so many shared backfields that, maybe it does take an injury for someone to get injured ahead of him and then him get on the field and us all be like, oh my God, yeah, why did we forget about this guy? Or NFL teams are like, how did we forget about this guy? So It'll be interesting to see. I do like him as well.
All right. So, we went through pretty much the top 6, guys in this class, pretty consensus. I want to hear from you. Who are some guys that, you might have dug some film up on, you might not have, you might have seen some things, you might have studied some things, but I know you like to dive deep into this rookie class. So I want to hear from you. Who are your other favorite running backs in this class? And where do you think, just what kind of fantasy production do you see for them? Who has the potential to really come out of, kind of the next tier of this running back, because the next tier is kind of all grouped together. They're all guys who have decent to average profiles and metrics. And so who comes out of that pack as guys that you like and that are interested in?
I mean, kind of picking up the torch of, like what could go wrong did go wrong. Like, dude, Auburn was a mess for the time that Tank Bigsby was there. Like Gus Malzahn moving on, I think he had a couple different coaches. Like the interim guy didn't stick around. They bring in some dude that I guess was at like Boise State before. I guess the players didn't like him. I think like 18 players transferred away from the program. Like it was bad. And then on top of that, like the Auburn Tigers offensive line was never particularly strong in front of them. But like when you watch Tank, like, dude, he's that boy. Like he goes for it. He's hard to bring down too. Like his center of gravity and just how much like the strength in his lower half just churns the earth, beneath him is like, bro, like this dude. They don't just call him like he didn't get the nickname of Tank ironically. It's not like Tank Dell, that really tiny receiver. Like, no, this one actually, like, I get it. It definitely makes sense. So, like, some of the production, you're going to look at it and be like, okay, like, this is a volume runner. He accumulated some, it's like, it's impressive. It's not eye-popping, but, like, pretty cool. But when you put into context how much of a nightmare Auburn was, and then you're like, oh, man, he carried this offense the entire time throughout all of that happening. Shout out Tank Bigsby. So it's just like, I just admire that guy and his guts doing all that. And then just quickly, because I haven't done his evaluation specifically, but because Texas, did like to deploy Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson at the same time, even though I was watching for Bijan in the first run of that film, like I would wonder sometimes, especially because like if they were both on the field and it didn't go to Bijan, some of those pieces of film like in the cut-ups were plays that went to Roshan, and I'm just like, damn, this guy's big. But like he's also like pretty quick for a guy as big as he is. So if you go back to the combine and you look at that 10-yard split of the 40-yard dash, like that's a pretty good indicator of exactly, how much burst a player has to get up to that speed. Like Roshan tested, I think, at the exact same time in the 10-yard split as Bijan did. Like, Roshan came in, I think, quarterback out of high school and then changed positions to running back while he was in college. So, I mean, he's like a little bit behind the curve as far as that goes developmentally, I would suppose. But like, bro, real quick, probably not, but I got to say Cartavius Bigsby is a great name too. So
I feel like they're both that boy nice names. And I don't think you can get a that boy nice name if your nickname is not something like Tank. So
that's true. 100%, bro.
Yeah.
I saw on Roshan for a second. I saw an interesting comp for him that I liked from. I can remember the person this time, but it was from Danny Kelly from The Ringer. He had it as Chris Carson as a comp to Roshan, which I thought was kind of interesting too, because Chris Carson is a little unique in that sense. He's like a big, powerful back, but I mean, he's got some of that breakaway speed. He's quicker than he looks, and he's kind of What'd you say?
I said he had breakaway speed.
All right.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
He might still be fast. That's not what
come
killed
on.
his career.
But yeah, I thought that was an interesting comp. One more guy, kind of. I know we're wrapping up a little bit, but I think we're all kind of wondering about the mystery box that is Sean Tucker, and his own combine tape that he filmed himself, putting out his numbers for that, as well as kind of a guy who last year, I feel like if you were talking about like the mid first round of rookie drafts, and people were talking about getting 2023 picks. Like he was a guy that was being talked about as like, get your 2023 firsts. Like you could get Sean Tucker, you could get, in that group. And now he's, like mid to late second. I've seen him go in the third round of rookie mocks. I know he just hasn't really been, present throughout this process because of his injuries. But where do you stand for him? I mean, really productive in college at Syracuse. I mean, what do you think about him?
So, callback to earlier in the show, that guy that I said we were going to mention that, like, he kind of has the long speed, but, like, that's kind of about it. Like, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but, I mean, just as for, like, that's kind of what I think about Tucker. Now, full disclosure, he is from the great state of Maryland. Okay, so I went to high school, played in Maryland, so obviously he's great. Like, I got, shout out Sean Tucker, Maryland boy, one Honda. He's from the area code, it's all good. But, like, I have some questions about, some of his judgments in terms of just like, where are you running to, man? Like, why are you doing this? But if, I don't know, in the right spot, if he gets coached up a little bit and they're just like, hey, man, with as fast as you are, just make some of these decisions a little bit better, a little bit faster, you'll be good. Because he is outrageously fast. And like, I don't really, the pro day thing was weird. The one that he filmed by himself, like, okay. So we didn't get to see him at the combine. We didn't get to see him at like, even like a real pro day, only a half real one, I guess, whatever. Like I kind of just knew he was fast. I didn't really need to see what his 40 time was. Like, I think it was just apparent that the dude was fast and also like Devin A-Chain, like Sean Tucker, also like a track guy. Like if you want to find out how fast he is, you can just look up some of his track numbers to figure it out and just deduce that information that way. Like, wouldn't be that hard. Might have to do a little bit of math, which is why I haven't done it, but you could probably figure it out. But yeah, I mean, like I said, like in the right situation where he can just be deployed, is just like, all right, here we go. We got it schemed up for you. All you got to do is run, baby. Boom. Then, like, we'll see. But he might be developmental if he can get that sort of coaching up. Maybe he could be good.
Yeah. There is one more guy that I want to get to before we wrap up here. And he's extremely divisive, but, he pretty much had a great combine. And look, everyone, he popped on the map for everyone after that crazy game where he had like 6 touchdowns and 300 yards. But Israel Abanikanda, is he a mirage? Is he legit? Is he landing spot dependent? Is there a middle of the Venn diagram here that works for everyone?
I don't know. So the big thing about him, just going through, because I like being film boy, but you also have to be film boy and numbers boy. Like I enjoy being numbers boy. I like looking at the analytics, those stuff. That stuff's fun. And the PFF elusive rating that I talked about earlier. So like not this past year, but the year before, he ranked like super high in that, and it was like, wow, dude. Like I think like within the top 10. Or whatever, like whatever minimum threshold of carries that I apply to it. Like I think I usually apply like 100 carries or whatever to it, but like super high on that. But then this past season, super good still. Don't get me wrong. I think it was 38 runs of 10 or more yards this past year. Like incredible. But it was I think like 70 some, 80 some more carries than he saw the year before. And in that same elusive metric, he dropped outside the top 100. So I'm just like, that to me is like, okay, like his size, weight, speed combination or whatever, like you're all these Raz fans out there, he's going to light up that chart. It's going to look pretty cool. Going to have a great Raz score. But is he going to be better on fewer touches is kind of the question to me. Just because I don't know. I'm not trying to hyper focus on one metric, but there was enough of a difference between that year before and this past year that I was like, that could be kind of something. But if he's just an early down home run hitter guy, especially at that size, like, bro, like, give me all of that, man. Like, oh, geez.
Like if he turns out to be like a home run hitter in the, in the Rashad Penny style mold, even if he doesn't catch a lot of passes, like he could be someone that really, really carves out that kind of role. And, look, in today's NFL, we can't assume that anybody's going to be a 3-down back anymore. The only one we can really assume from this class is Bijan anyways. So if he lands in a spot where he can be a grinder and maybe catch some passes at sometimes, but at the same time, he has the chance to take every single carry that he gets for 75 yards, then it's worth it at that point.
Okay.
So
can I do one more, guy?
Yeah.
One more before we wrap up. Dwayne McBride, I've been picking him like all the time in the third round of mocks, and I know he doesn't catch the ball at all. And that's, again, one of those sort of things where, like, can he just fit into a backfield and, like, have his certain role and maybe give you production like an RB2 type of guy? I mean, he was insanely productive in college at UAB. I mean, ran for almost 2,000 yards this year. Guy scores touchdowns. I mean, he had 19 this year, 13 last year. Smaller school, but pretty good size. And aside from not catching the ball, which I understand will limit his high-end upside in fantasy, I still think he can be productive, and I've been like addicted to taking him in the third round. So what's going on with him? What are your thoughts on Dwayne McBride before we wrap up?
I think people need to remember sometimes, if we're just, really distilling it back down to the true meaning of American football, and we're talking about the running back, just like a big boy that can just pound the rock. There is nothing wrong with that. Like, sure, there's no frills, okay? Like, there's not a ton of interesting stuff that goes into that, but, like, I think about my beloved Pittsburgh Steelers. This is the type of player that I could easily see, maybe like the 6th round or something, because I don't know what's happening with Benny Snell. I think once it's past Najee and Jalen Warren, I'm not sure what the depth is behind it. So, like, there are some of those running backs that I'm looking at, and this is more just me from a fan perspective, but speaking to your greater point anyway, like, those are the types of dudes that I would be looking at for my favorite team, where it's just like, okay, do I think this dude's going to be able to do all of these different things and wow everybody? No. But is he big and can he thump? If you can do those two things, you are a running back in the NFL. And like McBride, like I think like Chris Rodriguez out of Kentucky is like another dude kind of like that, where it's just like, okay, he's a thick boy that does the thing. He just hand ball, run ball. Like that's fine. If that's all you do, but you're really good at it, like sure. Does the cap the ceiling? I guess. Yeah. But if enough injuries happen and an opportunity pops up and an offense is like, okay, we're already down like 2 players, but we got this young kid. He's really got those thighs on him. We're just going to give it to him however many times and run out this clock. You love those guys.
Yeah. I feel like with him, it'll be all about expectations. You can't expect him to be, have that high-end profile. You can't expect him to be, one of those, top 5 backs because he's just not going to have the pass catching ability. But yeah, I do really like watching him, and I think he's going to, find some sort of role in the NFL.
I want a yes or no answer to this question because he's a guy that I've liked for a while. I know the fact that he hasn't pretty much done any workouts at all and didn't play in the national championship. A little bit worrisome to me, but really liked what I saw from him this year. And obviously he unseated Zach Evans at TCU. Kendre Miller, dog or not a dog?
Nah.
Okay.
Not for her.
I thought he was getting a dog. I thought he was getting a dog for sure there, to be honest.
Well, you win some, you lose some. I will still draft Kendre Miller, and he will be in my top 10 over at my Football Guys rookie rankings that will be going up this week. But look, Herms, again, thank you for coming on. Always appreciate you coming on and breaking down the running backs. I know you absolutely love those running backs. So tell everyone again where they can find you if you're working on anything special, and whether Cam Akers is good at football or not.
Oh, you're not going to bait me into that one there, Sam. I see but you can find me on the Twitter machine at Herms NFL. You can find all of my work over at DraftSharks.com. I think by the time you're hearing this, maybe it's already the next day. I don't know. Later in the week, okay? I've got Tank Bigsby coming out. I got that profile coming out. I've also got Israel Abanikanda coming up. So I'm still going through all these guys. And you can read all the ones that I've done in the past, once again, over on the website, www.draftsharks.com. My head's in those rookie running back clouds. That's pretty much what I'm doing.
Yep, and that I will link a couple of those profiles in the description of this video as well. But again, guys, thank you for coming out to watch and listen to this. We will post the recording of this on the podcast feeds either tonight or tomorrow. And stay tuned. We're having Alfredo Brown on from Football Guys next week to talk rookie wide receivers as well. And I'm hyped for that. So as for all of us here at High Floor Football, he's Jay Arsht, I'm Sam Wagman, and we'll see you guys next week.